Hello everyone, in today's video we will talk about the nerve supply of the stomach. The stomach has the both motor supply and also the sensory supply. The motor functions of the stomach are controlled by the autonomic nervous system and the enteric nervous system. In case of autonomic nervous system, the motor functions of the stomach are controlled by the brain and the spinal cord. We can see here. So this is the autonomic nervous system, but the enteric nervous system is present within the stomach. It is not dependent on the brain or spinal cord. This nervous system acts as the local mini brain, which actually maintains the detailed work. So in case of autonomic nervous system, it is dependent on the brain and spinal cord, and the enteric nervous system is totally separate. It is not dependent on the brain or spinal cord. Yep, so the autonomic nervous system and the enteric nervous system. We will see how they work after a few slides, but right now we are going to start with the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system has two components. One is the sympathetic nervous system and another one is the parasympathetic nervous system, which we can see here above. In this case, the motor functions of the stomach are controlled by the brain and also the spinal cord. So the brain and spinal cord are involved in the autonomic nervous system. And we are going to start with the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is triggered by the stress, fear, exercise, pain, or any sort of emotional excitement. So in these cases, in the emergency cases, the signal for the sympathetic nervous system is generated, and the signal is generated within the hypothalamus. So we know that this is the thalamus, and below the thalamus we have the hypothalamus here. So the hypothalamus, it generates the signals for the sympathetic nervous system. This is known as the autonomic control center. That means this center controls the autonomic functions, that is the sympathetic and parasympathetic functions. Okay, that center is situated within the hypothalamus. But now here is an important thing to note. The motor signals for the stomach, the motor signals for the smooth muscle, that is generated within the hypothalamus. But we know that there is a motor area in the brain that generates the motor function that is present within the superlateral surface of the brain, specifically in the motor area, that is the precentral gyrus. So this is the precentral gyrus, which has the motor area. This motor area also generates this motor signals, but it actually controls the motor function of the skeletal muscle, not the smooth muscles of the viscera. So this motor area, the premotor area of the precentral gyrus, it controls the skeletal muscle. And the motor signal for the stomach, that is generated within the hypothalamus, and from there they travel through the brainstem, and then it enters into the spinal cord, and then they end in the lateral horn at the level of the thoracic 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9 segments of the spinal cord. And this is a cross section of the spinal cord we can see, and suppose this is at the level of the thoracic 5. We can see here that this is the gray matter, and in the outer section we have the white matter. So outer white matter and inner gray matter. This is the ventral root and this is the dorsal root. In the dorsal root we can see there is a ganglia which is known as the dorsal root ganglia. The ventral root and dorsal root, they two become united to form the spinal nerve. So this is the spinal nerve, and we can see there is anterior rami and posterior rami, and the anterior rami is connected with the sympathetic chain ganglia here, and we can see that the sympathetic chain ganglia is connected with the rami with the white rami communicantis here. This is the white rami communicantis, and within the gray matter we can see that there is anterior horn, and we have the posterior horn, and at this level we have the lateral horn as well. Here you can see two projections. This is the lateral horn. So the ventral horn, dorsal horn and the lateral horn, and in the center we have the central canal. And we saw that the signal actually came downward, and we said that it actually terminates in the lateral horn. In the lateral horn of the gray matter, they terminate this, the signals terminate in a specific cell column, that is the intermediolateral cell column. We have many other cell columns like the ventral cell column, then the dorsal cell column, and this is the intermediate one. In the intermediate we have the intermediomedial and intermediolateral. So the signal actually terminates specifically in the intermediolateral lateral group of cell column. So here the terminate, the signals terminate actually. So from here the sympathetic fibers, they arise. And we have two types of sympathetic fibers. We have a ganglia here which is known as a celiac ganglia. So before the ganglia we have the preganglionic fiber which is present before the ganglia. So this fiber is known as the preganglionic fiber, and at this ganglia we have another fiber arising which is known as the postganglionic fiber. So the preganglionic fiber, and then we have the postganglionic fiber, and they are the motor fibers. The motor preganglionic sympathetic fiber, the motor postganglionic sympathetic fiber. So preganglionic fiber arises in the intermediolateral cell group of the lateral horn of the spinal cord, and they travel through the ventral root of the spinal cord, and then they pass through the spinal nerve, and then they travel through the vitra communicants here and enters into the sympathetic chain ganglia. But in this ganglia they do not synapse, they just pass through the ganglia and enters into the celiac ganglia, and here they terminate. And from the celiac ganglia, the postganglionic sympathetic fiber, they arise and they ultimately they enter into the stomach. So let us see here, as I've said earlier, that the sympathetic motor fibers, they're arising at the level of the thoracic 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9 levels, and from here these are the preganglionic fibers. They are traveling through the ventral root of the spinal cord, and then they enter into the spinal nerve, and then they enter into the sympathetic chain ganglia here. But here they do not make any synapse, they just pass through the ganglia and enter into the celiac ganglia. Here is one thing, that these preganglionic fibers of the thoracic 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9, they together are forming a nerve which is known as the greater splanchnic nerve. So the preganglionic fibers together are forming the greater splanchnic nerve here anyways, and it terminates into the celiac ganglia here. Now what is celiac ganglia? This is a sympathetic ganglia. We have the abdominal aorta here. The ventral branches of the abdominal aorta are the celiac trunk, then we have the superior mesenteric artery, and we also have the inferior mesenteric artery. Near the celiac trunk we have the celiac ganglia, and near the superior mesenteric artery we have the superior mesenteric ganglia, and near the inferior mesenteric artery we have the inferior mesenteric ganglia. So these are the sympathetic ganglia. The preganglionic sympathetic fibers for the stomach actually terminates here. So we can see the termination of the preganglionic fibers here, and after that the postganglionic fiber arises at this level from the celiac ganglia, and then they pass through the celiac plexus. We can see a nerve plexus here that is known as the celiac plexus, situated in front of the celiac trunk. Anyways, the postganglionic fiber actually pass through the celiac plexus, and then they enter into the stomach. In the stomach, finally they innervate the smooth muscles of the stomach, then the gastric glands, then also the blood vessels. So they're innervating these three structures. So this is the sympathetic supply of the stomach, and we can clearly see that these are the preganglionic fibers which are short here, and the postganglionic fiber here, this is long. And we saw that the synapse actually happens in the celiac ganglia. So this is the arrangement of the sympathetic supply of the stomach. Now let us see how they function. So we saw that these nerves actually innervate the smooth muscles of the stomach, and here they actually relax the smooth muscles of the body and the upper portion. But this nerve actually constricts the smooth muscles of the pyloric sphincter. So the body, this portion actually gets relaxed, and the pyloric sphincter, it becomes tightened. So ultimately the gastric emptying is delayed. We also said that these nerves also innervates the gastric glands, and they ultimately reduce the gastric secretion from those glands. Thus it also decreases the digestion. So it delays the gastric emptying and also decreases the digestion. These fibers also innervate the blood vessels, and the sympathetic stimulation to the blood vessels here, they actually constrict the blood vessel and redirect the blood flow towards the brain, heart and other vital organs like the lung and skeletal muscle, etc. Because we know in the emergency situation we need more blood flow to the vital organs like the brain, heart, then the skeletal muscle, lung. There you need more blood flow in that time in the emergency situations. So the blood flow from these organs like the stomach and intestine, from this area the blood flow is redirected towards these vital organs. So it actually delays the gastric emptying, then also decreases the digestion and also redirects the blood flow towards the vital organs. So that is all about the sympathetic supply of the stomach. Now the parasympathetic supply of the stomach. The parasympathetic nervous system becomes activated during the rest, relaxation and while feeding. I mean during the rest and digestion phase. So during this time, the signal for the parasympathetic nervous system is originated in the hypothalamus. So here we can see that the signals for the parasympathetic nervous system, they actually arise within the hypothalamus, I mean the autonomic control center of the hypothalamus, and from there they descend downward through the brainstem, but instead of going to the spinal cord like the sympathetic nervous system, they do not reach to the spinal cord, they actually terminate within the medulla oblongata of the brainstem. So here we can see that this is the midbrain, then pons, and then we have the medulla oblongata. So the signals actually terminate in the medulla oblongata. More specifically, if I say that actually terminates into the dorsal motor nucleus of the vagus nerve. There they terminated into the lateral gray column of the spinal cord, and here they terminate into the dorsal motor nucleus of the vagus nerve. From there, the parasympathetic preganglionic fibers, they arise. This is known as the preganglionic fiber, and they terminate into some ganglia which are known as the intramural ganglia. Intramural, that means they are present within the muscle of the stomach. So these are the ganglia, and the preganglionic fibers, they terminate here. And these preganglionic fibers, they form the vagus nerve. Here in case of sympathetic nervous system, we saw that the preganglionic fibers together, they were forming the greater splanchnic nerve. But in case of parasympathetic nervous system, the preganglionic fiber here, it actually forms the vagus nerve. So in case of sympathetic nervous system, it was the greater splanchnic nerve, and in case of parasympathetic nervous system, it forms the vagus nerve. So this long preganglionic fiber, it actually terminates into the intramural ganglia of the stomach, and from the ganglia, the postganglionic fibers, they arise. You can see the small one, and here we can see the ganglia situated here, and this is the preganglionic fiber, and this is the postganglionic fiber. And here the preganglionic fibers, these are long, and postganglionic fiber, they are very short. So these are parasympathetic fibers. Let us see the course of this nerve. The preganglionic fibers, they arise into the dorsal motor nucleus of the medulla oblongata here, and then they actually travel downward. And let us open the app here now. So now here we are going to show you the course of the vagus nerve. So this is the brain we know, and we have the midbrain, pons and the medulla oblongata here. Together they're forming the brainstem. So this is the brainstem, and here above we can see the cerebral hemispheres. We have two cerebral hemispheres, the right one and the left one, and let us see what is inside. Here we can see the thalamus here, and here we have the midbrain, and then pons and the medulla oblongata. So this is the brainstem. Now the signals for the motor functions of the stomach arise in this structure, that is the thalamus. So the signal originates here, and the signals pass through the brainstem here. So they actually pass through the midbrain, pons, and then they terminate in the medulla oblongata. In the medulla oblongata, the signals specifically terminate into the dorsal motor nucleus of the vagus nerve. And from that nucleus, that is the dorsal motor nucleus of the vagus nerve, the preganglionic parasympathetic fibers, they arise. Those are the motor fibers, motor parasympathetic fibers. So they arise and pass through the vagus nerve. So here we can see the vagus nerve. On each side we have two vagus nerves. So the right vagus nerve and the left vagus nerve. They are arising from the medulla oblongata here, and then they pass through the, let us bring the skull here. So here is the skull, we can see, and we can see in the base of the skull, the vagus nerve is passing through a foramen, that is the jugular foramen. See, that is the jugular foramen in the base of the skull. So the vagus nerves, they exit the skull through the jugular foramen. So we have the right vagus nerve here and we have the left vagus nerve. Now both the vagus nerves, they enter into the thorax, and we can see here that the left vagus nerves, it actually comes in front of the esophagus here, we can see, and we can see the right vagus nerve here. This is the right one goes behind the esophagus. So this is the back side of the esophagus. I have rotated this, so we can see the right one, it goes to the back side of the esophagus. See, so the left one and the right one, the left one comes in front and the right one, it goes behind. Both of them they form a esophageal plexus here around the esophagus. So this is the nerve plexus, and it is formed by the right and the left vagus nerves. From this plexus we can see the anterior vagal trunk and the posterior vagal trunk, they arise. The anterior vagal trunk is mainly formed by the left vagus nerve, and the posterior vagal trunk, it is formed by the right vagus nerve. So the left vagus nerve is coming in front, and after passing through the esophageal plexus, it is forming the anterior vagal trunk, and the right vagus nerve, it passes through the esophageal plexus and ultimately forms the posterior vagal trunk. So now we have the two vagal trunks, the anterior vagal trunk, and on the back side of the esophagus we have the posterior vagal trunk. Now both of them enter into the abdomen, and after entering into the abdomen, see, this is the anterior vagal trunk, it actually divides into two branches. Here we can see the two branches. One is the hepatic branch and the other is the gastric branch. Let us talk about the hepatic branches first. So this is the hepatic branch, and it again divides into two branches, the ascending branch and the descending branch. I could have included both here, but it made the diagram look so clumsy. So instead I've just shown the descending branch here, and I have indicated the position of the ascending branch with this arrow mark, with this white arrow mark, just to keep the visual clean and focused. The ascending branch actually goes to the liver and gallbladder, and also it supplies the biliary passage. And also we have a descending branch. So we can see that the descending branch is supplying the pyloric sphincter here. We know the pyloric sphincter is present here in this location. So this branch is supplying the pyloric sphincter here. So this branch, the descending branch, is also known as the pyloric branch. And we can see this branch, the pyloric branch, it is inverted Y-shaped. Anyways, so this is the hepatic branch, which has the ascending and descending branch. The descending branch supplies the pyloric sphincter. And now we have the gastric branches here. So the gastric branch is again subdivided into 6 to 10 branches, and it supplies the anterior superior surface of the stomach. And the main gastric branch here, it stays close to the lesser curvature, we can see, and this is known as the nerve of Latorjet. We know this is the angular notch of the stomach, so it extends up to the angular notch, and there it gives off the terminal branches. The terminal branches, they have an appearance of the crow's foot. See the similarity? So they have an appearance of the crow's foot, and they supply the pyloric antrum. So we have finished the anterior vagal trunk. Now we are going to talk about the posterior vagal trunk. So this is the posterior vagal trunk here, and this is formed by the right vagus nerve. Upon entering the abdomen, the posterior vagal trunk divides into the gastric branch and the celiac branch here. So this is the gastric branch and this is the celiac branch. So the main gastric branch here, it runs along the lesser curvature, and its branches they supply the posterior inferior surface of the stomach. Sometimes the posterior vagal trunk gives off a separate branch which supplies the fundus of the stomach, which is known as the nerve of the Grassi. So that is the gastric branch. Now we have the celiac branch here. So this is the celiac branch. But the celiac branch, it actually enters into the celiac plexus and supplies the other abdominal organs. So this is the course of the vagus nerve, we can see. So we have finished the autonomic nervous system of the motor supply of the stomach. Now we are going to talk about the enteric nervous system. The enteric nervous system is totally independent of the brain and spinal cord, and they can function independently, and this nervous system is present within the walls of the stomach. And this nervous system, or the enteric nervous system, is originated embryologically from the neural crest cells. So these are the neural crest cells we can see on the top of the neural tube. We can see that these are the neural crest cells, and they are migrating, and they finally migrate into the wall of the GI tract, including the stomach. So the enteric nervous system, in the wall of the GI tract, they actually migrate from the neural crest cells. So the neural crest cells, they migrate into the wall of the stomach, and there they form the enteric nervous system. And in the enteric nervous system, there are two kinds of plexuses: myenteric plexus and Meissner's plexus. So these are the layers of the stomach, and this picture is collected from the diffuse atlas of histology. In this picture, we can see the layers of the stomach here. So this is the mucosa, and we have the submucosa here, and these are the muscle layers, and outside we have the serosa. In the muscle layers, we have the inner oblique here, then middle circular and outer longitudinal group of muscles. So these are outer longitudinal, middle circular and inner oblique muscles. And we can see two types of plexuses here. So between the outer longitudinal and middle circular muscles, we can see a plexus here, nerve plexus. This is the myenteric plexus. And another one we can see in the submucosa, that is a Meissner's plexus. So Meissner's plexus in the submucosa and myenteric plexus in the muscle layer. These two plexuses, they are migrating from the neural crest cells. Now the myenteric plexus here, they are situated in the muscle layer. So they actually control the muscle contraction, and thus it actually controls the gastric motility. And the Meissner's plexus is situated in the submucosa. So this plexus controls the blood vessels and the gastric glands. Thus the Meissner's plexus, it controls the blood flow, local blood flow, by acting on the blood vessels, and it also controls the gastric secretions by acting on the gastric glands. So these plexuses control the gastric motility, then the local blood flow, and also the gastric secretion locally. They do not require any signals from the brain or spinal cord to control these functions. So these two plexuses control these functions locally by some local reflexes. And those local reflexes do not require any involvement of the brain or the spinal cord. These two reflexes are gastrocolic reflex and enterogastric reflex. And what is gastrocolic reflex? That is, when the stomach is distended, then the colonic movement happens. I mean the peristalsis happens. So the distension, the stomach distension increases the peristalsis here. This is one, the gastrocolic reflex, and another one is enterogastric reflex. This is another local reflex. In enterogastric reflex, if there is acid or any fatty food in the intestine, then the gastric emptying becomes slow. I mean the peristalsis of the stomach, it becomes slow. So these two reflexes are entirely controlled by the enteric nervous system without any involvement of the central nervous system. That is why it is called the local mini brain. However, one important thing to note is although these two plexuses can function autonomously, I mean independently, their actions can be modulated by the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. Here, the parasympathetic nervous system, they can enhance the enteric nervous system activity. That means it increases the gastric motility and also the gastric secretions or the blood flow. On the other hand, the sympathetic stimulation, it can inhibit the enteric nervous system activity. That means it decreases the gastric motility or the local blood flow or the gastric secretions. So yep, that is all about the enteric nervous system. So in short, we have the enteric nervous system, which is independent of the brain and spinal cord. So in the motor supply of the stomach, we have covered the autonomic nervous system and also the enteric nervous system. Now we are going to talk about the sensory supply. Look at these two diagrams, they're quite similar. So let us see. we are already familiar with this picture now. This is the autonomic motor supply of the stomach, and here we have the sympathetic motor pathway and parasympathetic motor pathway. The sensory supply of the stomach have a similar course because they use the same pathway. So these are the sympathetic pathway for the sensation from the stomach, and these are the parasympathetic pathway. As we are talking about the sensory supply of the stomach has actually two types of sensation. One is the pain sensation. The pain sensation is carried by the sympathetic fibers, and the stomach distension, then fullness of the stomach, then the chemical information like the pH, these type of sensations, these sensations are carried by the parasympathetic fiber. Now let us see their course. So we saw this figure a few moments ago. We're specifically going to talk about the sympathetic sensory supply, and we have said that sympathetic fibers are responsible for carrying the pain sensations from the stomach. So the pain in the stomach, they may arise from the gastric ulcers or ischemia or any sort of inflammation. So the pain sensation is carried by the sympathetic fibers. So see, this is the pathway. It is carrying the information from the stomach, and they're traveling along with the sympathetic nerves. They're passing through the sympathetic chain ganglia, here we can see, and they do not synapse there, and they're entering into the spinal cord through the dorsal root and enter into the dorsal horn, and they terminate there. If you want to know where they terminate, then we have to know about the lamina. We have the 10 lamina here. So here 1, then 5. These laminas are important here anyways. So this is the sympathetic fiber that is carrying the pain sensation from the stomach, and here we can see this is the peripheral process that is carrying the pain sensation, that is traveling along with the sympathetic motor fiber. The red one is a motor fiber and the green one is a sensory fiber. Anyways, they're traveling with the motor fiber here. They do not enter into the celiac ganglia though. They enter into the sympathetic chain ganglia, and then they pass through the white rami communicantes just like before and enter into the spinal nerve. And here the sympathetic motor fiber was traveling through the ventral root, but here the sympathetic sensory fiber, the sensory fiber travels to the posterior root or the dorsal root. Okay, both are sympathetic pathway. This one was the motor one and this one is the sensory one. So we can see that the sensory one uses the dorsal root and the motor one uses the ventral root. So it passes through the dorsal root and then enter into the dorsal horn of the spinal cord, more specifically into the 5 numbered lamella. Also they may terminate into the number 1 or 8 numbered lamella. So this is the first neuron that is carrying the sensation. So this is called the first order neuron, and we know in the white matter of the spinal cord we have the lateral spinothalamic tract. This is a pathway which carries the fibers from the spinal cord to the thalamus. So spinothalamic tract. Okay, anyways, so we saw the first order neuron. It is coming from the stomach and it has ended into the dorsal horn of the spinal cord, more specifically in the 5 number lamina. The next neuron arises from here, from the dorsal horn of the gray matter of the spinal cord. So this is the fiber. So it actually crosses the midline. We can see it crosses the midline and goes to the opposite side, and they ascend through the lateral spinothalamic tract. We know what this tract is anyways. So they ascend through the lateral spinothalamic tract. So this is the second order neuron, and we can see the synapse here in the 5 number lamella in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. So this is the second order neuron. Here we can see in the next picture, this is the first order neuron passing through the sympathetic chain ganglia. They're entering into the spinal cord through the dorsal root, and in the dorsal root ganglia we can see the cell bodies of these neurons. Anyways, this is a first order neuron, and then they terminate into the dorsal horn of the spinal cord, and from there the second order neuron, they arise and they cross to the opposite side and they ascend through the lateral spinothalamic tract, and ultimately they terminate into the thalamus here. So this is the second order neuron. So the second order neuron ends into the thalamus, and there they synapse with the third order neuron. So this is the third order neuron. We can see it starts from the thalamus and ends into the primary somatosensory area, that is in the paracentral lobule. So this is the central sulcus, and around this sulcus we have the paracentral lobule. In the posterior side we have the sensory area, and the anterior side we have the motor area. So it actually terminates into the posterior area of the paracentral lobule. It actually receives the sensation from the stomach. So we have the first order neuron, then the second order neuron, and then finally we have the third order neuron. The first order neuron carries the pain sensation from the stomach to the spinal cord. The second order neuron carries the pain sensation from the spinal cord to the thalamus, and the third order neuron, they carries the sensation from the thalamus to the primary somatosensory area, that is situated in the posterior side of the paracentral lobule, that is situated on the medial surface of the cerebral hemisphere. So the first order neuron, the second order neuron, and the third order neuron. So this was about the sympathetic supply, sympathetic sensory supply of the stomach. It actually carries only the pain sensation. So now we are going to talk about the sensory supply of the stomach, that is carried by the parasympathetic fibers. We have said earlier that the sensations like the stomach distension, then fullness of the stomach, then the chemical information of the stomach, those are carried by the parasympathetic fibers. So this is a parasympathetic fiber, we can see the first order neuron. So this fiber is carrying the sensations like the stomach distension, then fullness, then the chemical information of the stomach. So these informations are carried by this fiber. So this is the first order neuron that is carrying the information from the stomach to the brainstem, specifically in the medulla oblongata. If we become more specific, that is the nucleus tractus solitarius of the medulla oblongata. So this is carrying the sensation from the stomach to the medulla oblongata, and from here the second order neuron arises. So the second order neuron, it arises from the nucleus tractus solitarius of the medulla oblongata, and it terminates into the thalamus. So this is the second order neuron, and from here the third order neuron arises. So this is the third order neuron which is arising from the thalamus, and it terminates into the posterior area of the paracentral lobule. And we have two portions, the anterior portion and the posterior portion of the paracentral lobule. We know the anterior portion is the motor area and the posterior portion is the sensory area. So the sensory fibers, both in cases of sympathetic and the parasympathetic, they terminate into the sensory area, that is the posterior gyrus of the paracentral lobule. So this is the parasympathetic sensory fiber. The first order neuron, it carries the sensation from the stomach to the brainstem, and the second order neuron, it carries information from the brainstem to the thalamus, and the third order neuron, it carries information from the thalamus to the paracentral lobule. And that is it. So this is the sensory supply of the stomach. The sensations of the stomach are carried by both the sympathetic and parasympathetic fibers. We saw that the pain sensation is carried by the sympathetic fiber, and the sensations like the stomach distension and fullness of the stomach and the chemical information, they are carried by the parasympathetic fibers. And in case of sympathetic, the first order neuron, it carries the sensation from stomach to the spinal cord, and the second order neuron, it carries the sensation from the spinal cord to the thalamus, and the third order neuron, it carries the sensation from the thalamus to the paracentral lobule. And in case of parasympathetic fiber, it carries the sensation from the stomach to the brainstem, and then the second order neuron, it carries information from the brainstem to the thalamus, and the third order neuron, it carries the sensation from the thalamus to the paracentral lobule. So that is it. And in both cases, the first order neuron, we can see these are the pseudo-unipolar neuron. We know we have, in case of pseudo-unipolar neuron, we have a cell body and a peripheral process and a central process. In case of sympathetic supply, we can see that the cell body is present in the dorsal root ganglia, and this is the peripheral process, and this is the central process. And in case of parasympathetic fiber, this is the cell body of the neuron that is present in the vagal ganglia, and this is the peripheral process, and here we can see the central process. So this is it. This is the sensory supply of the stomach. And again, here is another important thing to mark, that the sensory parasympathetic fiber here, this actually follows the course of the motor parasympathetic fiber. So you can see here the blue one, this is the motor parasympathetic fiber, and the pink one, this is the sensory parasympathetic fiber. So they are carried by the vagus nerve. Here, in case of parasympathetic fibers, we can see that the vagus nerve carries both the sensory and motor parasympathetic fiber. And in case of sympathetic supply, the greater splanchnic nerve, it carries both the motor and the sensory sympathetic fibers. In short, the vagus nerve carries the sensory and motor parasympathetic fibers, and the greater splanchnic nerve, it carries the motor and sensory sympathetic fibers. So that is it. We have talked about the sensory supply of the stomach, and we saw how the sympathetic and parasympathetic fibers they carry the sensations from the stomach to the paracentral lobule of the brain. And in case of motor supply, we saw we have the autonomic nervous system and the enteric nervous system. In case of autonomic nervous system, we saw it has the sympathetic and parasympathetic supply, and in case of enteric nervous system, it does not need any signals from the brain or spinal cord. So this is independent, and this nervous system is present within the wall of the stomach, as we showed earlier. The autonomic nervous system can modulate the function of the enteric nervous system. That is it. Okay, talked a lot today, but I hope you understood, and this video will definitely help you if you need a deeper understanding. And my next video will be on the histology of the stomach, most probably. And if you liked this video, then please do not forget to give a like, comment, or share this video, and please subscribe my channel. See you all in my next video. Till then, take care and goodbye.